And as ever, in this kind of a crowd, one person gets pushed, and it ended up that people got trampled on.
There, when the story breaks, BBC News.
Every composer knows when another composer is being influenced by their music.
The models wear costumes for men and women, inspired by outfits spanning the 8 decades of Empress Wu's long life.
If you can play this more Italian, think of like opera, Bellini opera. Think of like Maria Callas, more free.
As a writer, I care so much about the human imagination, about creativity, about our ability to tell stories. Just imagine our lives without storytelling.
Inspiring arts and culture on BBC News.
Live from Washington, this is BBC News. As war rages in Gaza, an Israeli strike hits the home of a doctor, killing 9 of her 10 children. Israel says that a claim regarding harm to uninvolved civilians is under review.
It's unbearably cruel that his mother, who is a paediatrician and has spent her professional life caring for children, could lose almost all her own in a single bomb or missile strike.
Russian attacks on Ukraine kill more than a dozen people as the two countries take part in day 2 of a major prisoner exchange. And ahead of the 5th anniversary of George Floyd's murder, where does America's racial reckoning stand? I'm Helena Humphrey, good to have you with us. The Israeli military says that it is reviewing reports that one of its airstrikes killed 9 children from the same family in southern Gaza. Only one of the children survived. Adam, who is 11 years old, sustained terrible injuries to his left arm. And his mother, Dr. Ala al-Najjar, is a paediatrician at Nasser Hospital. He was operated on by the surgeon Graham Groom, who told the BBC about what he called the unbearable cruelty of what his colleague experienced.
We were in the operating theatre at the Nasser Hospital complex, where we've been working every day for the past 10 days. We thought the day was coming to an end. And unusually, we had a number of cases that had come straight from the emergency department. And just when we thought we were going home, or going upstairs and finishing the day, this little boy appeared with a terrible wound to his left arm. And it was as he arrived in theatre that we heard the story that he was the sole survivor of 10 brothers and sisters, that his father was dreadfully injured, and that the only uninjured member of his family was his mother. Both his parents are doctors, both work at the Nasser Medical Complex. His father is a physician who is very badly injured with a penetrating injury to his head. And that was the background, and that was so unbelievably tragic that we did what was necessary for him. When folk are involved in bomb blasts, his left arm was just about hanging off. He was covered in fragment injuries, and he had several substantial lacerations. He was quite a small 11-year-old, and of course, if both parents were doctors, he would be amongst the privileged group within Gaza. But as we lifted him onto the operating table, he felt much younger than 11. Our colleagues, our Palestinian colleagues, are unbelievably resilient, and I have the utmost admiration for their discipline and professionalism. And so last night, we just got on with the job. But as I'm sure you might imagine, there was a ghastly pall hanging over all of us, really, to think of yet another family that has been almost completely wiped out. We know that there are many, many families in Gaza, more than 3,000, who've been obliterated completely. We also know that there are more than 4,000 families that have a single survivor. And it's not impossible that this family, there will only be 2 survivors from this family. Our little boy should survive. We don't know about his father. And I think it's unbearably cruel that his mother, who is a pediatrician and has spent her professional life caring for children, could lose almost all her own in a single bomb or missile strike, as well as her husband. It's such a monstrous evil that an entire family should be destroyed, that we think there must be a reason, there must be a motive. So all I know is what I have asked my Palestinian colleagues, and all of them say that to the best of their knowledge, he was not involved in politics, he was not involved in militancy, he was not involved in the military wing of Hamas. But of course, I'm only reporting what I heard, and I heard that because I asked, because it is such an awful thing to have happened.
Well, Israel does not allow international media organisations, including the BBC, to report from Gaza. We use material from trusted freelance teams on the ground. And our correspondent, Wira Davis, is in Jerusalem and with the latest on the strike and the Israeli reaction.
This has been one of the most disturbing incidents since Israel's escalation of its war in Gaza. A family of 12 people, 9 of them killed. The 2 parents and 1 11-year-old son are the only ones left alive. Now, Israel said it struck the area because it was targeting suspects in the area, and Israel said it would look into any assertions that civilians may have been harmed. But this is the latest in a long line of incidents where entire families have been almost wiped out. Israel's assertion that families should leave war zones like Khan Yunis for so-called safe zones elsewhere in the territory are dismissed by many people because they say there are no such things as a safe area in Gaza. For example, the Al-Mawasi camp, towards where many people are directed as a designated safe zone, that has been hit several times during the course of the war. Earlier this week, it was hit and several people were killed. Even before this incident, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres had said that the people of Gaza were experiencing the worst of this war. He was, of course, referring not just to the fighting, but the dire humanitarian crisis. In recent days, Israel has said that more aid has got in. Israel said it is sending in enough basic aid, but for the UN, that clearly isn't enough. The 80 or 90 trucks that have got in recent days, many of them have been looted either by armed gangs or by people desperate for food. And the UN says that hunger, that risk of famine won't be alleviated until 500 or 600 trucks a day are allowed into Gaza. All the while, there's increasing international pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu to end the war, to end the fighting. But he says that will not happen. The war will not end until Hamas is completely defeated.
Well, turning now to some breaking news on the war in Ukraine. And in the last hour, Ukraine has reported a renewed drone attack on Kiev, with officials saying that around a dozen Russian drones reached the city's airspace, with more expected. Now, it comes hours after Russia launched one of its biggest assaults on the Ukrainian capital since the war began. Explosions lit up the night sky in Kiev beginning on Friday night, with homes, businesses and vehicles damaged by strikes or falling debris. Across the country, officials say that at least 13 people were killed, 56 were injured since Friday. Now, in Kiev alone, the Ukrainian Air Force says that Russia launched 250 drones and 14 ballistic missiles. And Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky called the attacks vile and pleaded with allies to send more air defences. Our correspondent James Waterhouse sent us this report from Kiev.
It is Russian missiles that rule Kiev's skies. The sound of hundreds of drones taunted those trying to sleep below. This one hit a suburban area. President Zelensky has again called for Russia to face more pressure to agree to a ceasefire, because all signs point to Moscow wanting the opposite. On Ukraine's northern border, there was relief for the 300 or so more soldiers exchanged and the families waiting for them. As with yesterday's swap, they again appeared emaciated, and Kiev claims they've been tortured, brainwashed, isolated and deprived of sufficient food.
Hundreds more prisoners are expected to again arrive at this site, where they'll be greeted by medical teams, and this agreement seems to be holding. It's the only area of cooperation between Ukraine and Russia, and despite the palpable relief felt by some here as they're reunited with their loved ones, the idea of a ceasefire does not feel any closer.
On the Russian side, footage released by the Kremlin showed soldiers cheering next to a Russian and Soviet Union flag. Moscow says only after the swaps have ended will it publish its conditions for peace, which still appear to be the capitulation of Ukraine. James Waterhouse, BBC News, Kyiv.
Well, Peter Dickinson is chief editor of Business Ukraine magazine and editor of Ukraine Alert at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre. He joined me in the last hour from Kiev. Good to see you once again, Peter. So Russia launching this major attack on the Ukrainian capital. 13 people have been killed across the country. What more can you tell us?
Well, last night's attack was very long and loud, and now we're actually bracing for a repeat. There are already drones in the skies. I was just recently outside and heard the air defences banging away, and we also see reports of Russian bombers in the air in Russia, Russian warships in the Black Sea active. So it looks like it could be another long night. And this, of course, is it seems to be a very direct message to the Ukrainians, but also to the Americans, saying that Russia is not looking for peace. Donald Trump has been quite vocal in his criticism of, particularly of the Russian bombing of Ukrainian cities and Ukrainian civilians. It's one of the few areas where he's actually made any sort of public criticism of Putin, but Putin seems unmoved. He's continuing. So I think the message is very clear. They are not interested in moving towards a peace settlement. On the contrary, they're showing that they're ready to escalate further.
Peter, if you take a look at the events of this weekend, you've got something of a split screen, haven't you, with this large-scale prisoner exchange at the same time as those strikes that you were just referring to. What do you make of that? Does that give you any kind of hope for progress, or do you see this more as symbolic?
Well, the prisoner exchange is the largest of the war so far, and it's certainly a very development. The plight of Ukrainian prisoners in Russia is a major issue for the Ukrainian nation. It's a very sore point. It's well known, or it's widely regarded that they are abused in Russia. They are being tortured. The prisoners who have returned to come back with often very damaged, very psychologically and physically damaged. So this is a big deal to get them back, and that's very welcome. But the circumstances of the return are really, I think it's all about Russia giving something in order to keep these negotiations going, to sort of drag out the process. They have to be seen to be giving something in exchange. And I think a prisoner exchange is really at the bottom of the list of the absolute minimum they can give. So definitely it's welcome, but I wouldn't read too much into it in terms of Russia's willingness to go further in the peace process.
Something else I wanted to ask you about were reports that we are seeing of a Russian troop build-up along the border from Kharkiv, of course, the second largest city. Are you anticipating at all a major push along the front lines before the weather worsens? Keeping in mind, for example, that the Russians have retaken Kursk recently. Will they try to keep going?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we're just now entering the summer campaigning season, so this is the time when Putin is going to look to make gains. It's pretty clear from what we're seeing in the diplomatic arena that Russia's not looking for a peace settlement. They're not looking for to move toward a ceasefire. Even they are, on the contrary, looking to sort of maximise their gains on the front. And I think they'll certainly be looking to do that in East Ukraine, and also, as you mentioned, across the border toward Kharkiv, which has been a long-term target for the Russians. It's very close to the Russian border. It's a large Ukrainian city, the second city of the country, but it's literally a stone's throw from the Russian border. And they'll be hoping that they can swoop down there and perhaps put the city under a lot of pressure, maybe even isolate it. And that would be a major blow for the Ukrainian war effort if they were able to make progress there on the Kharkiv front.
And you mentioned the diplomatic efforts in all of this. President Trump, for one, has said that he wants to see an end to this war. He's also said that he isn't against using pressure against Vladimir Putin. I mean, what do you make of that? Do you see him using any kind of further levers of pressure that he hasn't used before that could potentially bring some progress?
Well, I mean, that's the big question. Trump has said repeatedly that he would be prepared to use other pressure, particularly sanctions or some secondary tariffs, perhaps, or sort of economic tools. He's raised that prospect on a number of occasions, but he's not yet followed through. In fact, on the contrary, he's sort of held back. So I think what it's all about at the moment is really, I think the Ukrainians and their European partners are hoping to convince Trump to sort of play along with these peace efforts, but to convince Trump that Putin doesn't want peace, and really the only way to move to a resolution of this war is by putting more pressure on Putin, which Trump seems very reluctant to do. But as far as the view certainly in Kiev, and I think is shared by most European leaders certainly, is that this is really a phony peace process. The Russians are not engaged. They're not interested in moving towards peace. And the key really is to apply pressure. But that has to be done in concert with the Americans. And at the moment, Trump seems very reluctant to do that.
Peter Dickinson, chief editor of Business Ukraine magazine and editor of Ukraine Alert at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre. Thank you so much, Peter.
Thanks.
Now, this weekend marks 5 years since the murder of George Floyd. The 46-year-old black man was killed during a police arrest in Minneapolis in 2020. And video of Derek Chauvin, a white police officer kneeling on Mr. Floyd's neck for around 9 minutes as he struggled to breathe, sparked global protests and a national conversation about racial injustice. Well, 5 years on, the Trump administration is rolling back many of the policies prompted by the Black Lives Matter movement, like police reform, as well as diversity, equity and inclusion programs. And in an interview marking the anniversary of his brother's death, George Floyd's younger brother said that he is committed to keeping George Floyd's legacy alive through activism.
I think he would have just told me, keep fighting. He always told me, you have to have heart. As long as people know that you're there, they're willing to ride with you. Until all the wheels fall off, they still gonna be there with you. And a lot of these people never gave up.
Well, with me in the studio tonight is Patrice Willoughby, Chief of Policy and Legislative Affairs at the civil rights organisation, the NAACP. Welcome to you, Patrice. Very good to have you with us this evening. We were just mentioning there that this Sunday will mark the 5th anniversary of the killing of George Floyd. I'd just like to begin by getting your thoughts on that anniversary and where you think we stand in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement today.
Well, Helena, thank you so much for inviting me. It is a critical time in the nation's history because 5 years after George Floyd's death, there has not been meaningful reform in policing, and recent actions of the Trump administration have canceled out the very real movement that the Biden administration took and some of the investigations on patterns and practices of policing, and so it is disappointing at this moment.
And specifically here in Washington, D.C., for example, if we look at some of the markers, the things that were erected specifically for Black Lives Matter movement, including the square, they've now been dismantled. I just wonder, when you see that, what you think that says.
Well, I think that, in Washington, of course, the sign was demolished, but more deeply, there is an anti-equity movement across the country because the executive orders on diversity, equity, and inclusion have cast a lot of chaos in the way that institutions, corporations have put policies in place that ensure equity and fairness. That does not bode well for multiracial democracy, and it's a potential economic disaster as well.
You started by touching on some of those police reforms as well that have been enacted in the wake of his killing. If you take a look at cities like police departments in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Louisville, Kentucky, of course, places where we saw some of those really large protests in the wake of not just the killing of George Floyd, but also Breonna Taylor as well. And the argument from the Trump administration has been that these reforms lead to what they have called micromanagement. And I wonder, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, policing is always a local issue. But the fact that there has been police misconduct and so many police-involved killings across the country shows a basic dysfunction in the policing mechanism across the country. And so the federal response has always been a corrective measure to ensure standardized processes and procedures to ensure fairness. That has been the role of the federal government since the enactment of the 14th Amendment in 1868. And so calling these things micromanagement is really labeling them in a pejorative way when their real focus is fairness.
And going beyond that, specifically when we look at the case of Derek Chauvin, for example, we have seen people who are close to the administration, Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, being among those who have joined the defense against him. What do you make of that when you hear that?
Well, to me, it signals a very nativist element because the country is shifting in its demographics very rapidly. And in 20 years, the United States will be a majority-minority country. What's really important now is that instead of moving away from diversity, equity, and inclusion, we need to be shoring it up to ensure that our society continues to make progress and that people have opportunity as well as the fair application of policing.
And briefly, Patrice, with the anniversary of George Floyd's killing, how is he being remembered? What kind of events are we seeing?
Well, there are remembrances across the country. I think that it's important for people to think about the beauty of this country and the contributions of people through all walks of life in the United States. And we can hope that this remembrance of Mr. Floyd and his family bodes well for our continued progress and continued movement towards justice.
Patrice Willoughby, Chief of Policy and Legislative Affairs at the NAACP. Thank you for being with us here on BBC News.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the top prize at the Cannes Film Festival, the Palme d'Or, has been awarded to It Was Just an Accident, a thriller set in Iran made by the dissident director Jafar Panahi. Now, the film was shot in secret. It was based partly on Panahi's own experience in Iranian prisons. His last spell in prison, from which he was freed in 2023, was for protesting against the detention of two fellow filmmakers who had been critical of the authorities. Well, Clayton Davis is the chief awards editor at Variety. He talked me through his thoughts on this year's winner.
Oftentimes, a story of a filmmaker going against odds for his art can really touch a jury and everything that they feel is under attack at this point in time, both in America and globally. And when you have someone that has risen above the way Jafar has and is now at the festival, you know, that really spoke to it. On top of that, the movie has been universally acclaimed. You know, when you're a great movie, that also helps your bid. But when you look at the lineup this year, it was pretty spread out in terms of what was hitting at the right time. If you were at the top of the festival, it didn't look like a lot of movies were really getting those big standing ovations. But by the end, I mean, sentimental value, and it was just an accident, really spoke to the jury, so they selected it.
Yeah, tell us more about Sentimental Value. This was awarded the Grand Prix, or the second prize, a Norwegian family drama. What did you make of it?
So when you look at this, I think the overall story has to be Neon, which is the film distributor that had the movie before the festival started, and they also bought the Palme d'Or winner. It was just an accident. This now makes 6 Palme d'Ors consecutively for Neon that they have won at this festival. They're like the Meryl Streep of movie studios at the moment. Sentimental Value, which is written and directed by Joachim Trier, who helmed The Worst Person in the World, which also premiered at Cannes and did very well. I mean, this movie looks to be front to back an awards player if we're looking that far ahead. But Joachim Trier has been this big Norwegian filmmaker that a lot of people have loved for many years, and this seems to be his big step into the mainstream where people are really going to embrace it.
Well, in football, Arsenal have won the Women's Champions League, pulling off a surprise victory over Barcelona to claim Europe's biggest club competition. The match finished 1-0 in Lisbon, with Stina Blackstenius scoring the winning goal for Arsenal. It is the first time that they've won the competition in some 18 years, and Barcelona had been aiming for a 3rd straight title.
We know what we are, champions of Europe. We know what we are.
Well, these were the celebrations outside of the stadium after the match among the 4,500 travelling Arsenal fans. Well, before we go, how much would you pay for a piece of Formula One history? Well, the Ferrari driven by Michael Schumacher during his victories at the 2001 Monaco and Hungarian Grand Prix has sold at auction for just over $18 million. It's long been considered one of the most sought-after Grand Prix Ferraris ever made, especially as the Hungarian victory secured Schumacher his 4th world title, that price making it one of the most expensive F1 cars ever to go under the hammer. You're watching BBC News. I'm Helena Humphrey in Washington, D.C. Plenty more on the way at the top of the hour. Join us if you can. Bye for now.
Now on BBC News, a global, topical, weekly show that lifts the hood on the entertainment and news business, exploring the companies and personalities who command our attention and how our perception of the world is shaped by them. The Media Show.
Hello, I'm Katie Razzle.
And I'm Ros Atkins. This week on The Media Show, one of the BBC's biggest name presenters has stood down over a social media post.
We're talking to the journalist who opened up the family courts to reporting.
And we'll hear from the winner of the Paul Foot Award for Investigative and Campaigning Journalism. That's all on The Media Show.
For more than 25 years, Gary Lineker has been the face of Saturday nights on the BBC, presenting Match of the Day.
In recent years, the former England football captain turned TV presenter has started sharing opinions on politics and world affairs on social media. It's got him in trouble before, but last week he crossed the line.
He shared a post about Zionism that included an illustration of a rat, historically an anti-Semitic trope. He posted an apology, but later announced he would be leaving the BBC.
Hi everyone, some personal news. Last week I shared a post here on Instagram that contained an emoji that has awful connotations. Unfortunately, I did not see the emoji. If I had, I would never ever have shared it. The minute I was made aware, I quickly deleted the post and went on to make an apology. I would like once again to say I'm sorry unreservedly for the hurt and upset caused. It was a genuine mistake and oversight, but I should have been more diligent. I know that.
We're going to bring in someone who worked alongside Gary Lineker at BBC Sport first. That's Steve Ryder, former presenter of Grandstand, the Masters Golf and the Olympics. He gave us his reaction.
Really, this should have happened about 2 years ago. It was inevitable. There's been a succession of sort of papering over the cracks and compromise agreements and so on. I think it is a great thing for Gary. I think he can get out there now and put his views forward in a far more free and forthright manner. It's great for the BBC because the way forward is now a little less cluttered by issues that have carried on for far, far too long.
And why do you think those issues carried on? What was going on behind the scenes in your view?
Well, I mean, I was there at the BBC for the first part of Gary's career from about 92 onwards. Good guy, good company, good presenter. But he was always slightly different within the mix. I mean, of course, he arrived with an England goal-scoring record, which put us all to shame. But he also arrived with a big Walker's Crisps sponsorship deal, which was the envy of all of us because that wasn't part of our kind of BBC contract at all. We were told at that time that it was because the deal was ongoing and it'll all be sorted out over the next few years and it wouldn't be allowed to continue. It turned